process and procedure is what the committee always does.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Robert Phoenix here, and welcome to 15 Minutes of Flame. I actually have the Kavanaugh hearings on in the background. You can actually listen in a little bit here.
All three submitted statements to the Senate under penalty of felony.
So this is taking place right now in Washington, and I'm going to be commenting on it as we move through today's show. And I'm also going to get into the Kavanaugh chart, which I'm going to break down. It's actually not the Kavanaugh chart, it's the chart for the hearings for tomorrow. What's going on, Lori? How are you? So I'm just going to plug in now and move away from the Kavanaugh sound. I'm going to have it on in the background. I'm just going to look at it every now and then. And if I see something that's worthwhile, I'll plug in and let you guys listen in, okay?
I nevertheless honored her request for a public hearing.
Just give me 1 second here. I just need to there's a lot of people watching this right now. A lot of people watching this. And hold on 1 second. Okay, so I've cut the volume, and I'm just going to have it on in the background. And we're going to check in on it every now and then, just to give you an update as to what's happening. So this is it. We're coming down to the big showdown. Christine Blasi Ford has arrived in Washington, D.C., and to say that she looks uncomfortable would be an understatement. She looks like she's a woman on the verge of a nervous breakdown. And if you follow the comments that are happening in the video chat, some of the allegations are that she looks like a man. There's all kinds of, I mean, this is a woman that is not, at least physically, representing herself very well today. Chuck Grassley is kind of leading the charge, and of course, Feinstein will come in and give her version of the story. They're sitting side by side, and it's the classic left-right paradigm. It's the classic he said, she said, and it is the classic implementation of duality that we're experiencing right now. However, I do want to talk about it, and I do want to talk about what's going on, and ultimately looking at the chart for tomorrow, which is surprising. Hey, what's going on, Sonia? Nice to see you in here. Which is a surprising chart. So one of the things that I've been thinking about, because yesterday I try to be as sensitive as I possibly can be, because one of the things that the Me Too movement has brought up is that obviously there's a great deal of suffering. A lot of people have gone through some heavy duty shit in their lives when it comes to either being abused or being forced to do things against their will. And those are all very important items. And it's not just women that have gone through it, it's men that have gone through it. So I think we're trying to understand and wrap our heads around, the kind of the enormity of the situation. And it's interesting because this is taking precedence over a lot of the pedogate stuff or the child trafficking stuff. It's like, this is what we're talking about at a high level. What we're not talking about is children that are abducted out of places like Haiti or other countries, the Philippines or Taiwan, or Vietnam, or even in this country where children go missing each year, and lots of them, quite frankly. This is not part of the discussion. We're talking about a he said, she said that took place in the 1980s. Now, some new pieces of information have come out recently, overnight. Two men have come forward and said that they were at the party, that they were the men that actually were involved in whatever Christine Blasi is alleging happened. Well, that's quite interesting in a lot of ways, because it throws a monkey wrench in the democratic process and the democratic plans. Now, who the two men are, I don't know. They haven't revealed their identities, but they've come forward. How does this change things? How does this change the tenor of the so-called investigation, which is really nothing more than a witch hunt, to be quite honest with you? Will they be allowed to testify? Will Christine Blasi be forced to recall who these two men were? And if so, her credibility will be seriously. It'll be seriously. That's what I'm looking for. Threatened on some level, right? So these are these are super interesting times, and of course, we're getting more and more conflict, more and more strife, more and more friction, and this tends to be not great for the overall psyche of the country. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about this, like what has gone on with Kavanaugh, and what I believe is, in many ways, the failure of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant American male. And if we look at what's been happening over the course of really the last couple of years as Me Too, I guess it's really been about a year now since Me Too gained some traction. I think Harvey Weinstein was the first big whale, pun slightly intended, with Me Too. And Weinstein is not a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male. He happens to be Jewish. And there have been, let's see, Louis C.K. I think Louis C.K. is Jewish through his mother's side and Mexican / Spanish through his father's side. Les Moonves happens to be Jewish. So it's not just a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant phenomenon with hashtag Me Too, but clearly I think the bulk of the accusations have been against white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about was the breakdown in leadership in the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male community, which has led to whatever it is that's taking place now. If you go back and listen to Kay Griggs, and I highly, highly recommend that you listen to all 5 hours of the Kay Griggs interviews that she did with Jeff Rense a long time ago. And she did them again, I believe, with a pastor on kind of a local religious TV station. One of the things that you'll hear over and over again from Kay Griggs is the betrayal of her husband, and who is, I believe he was either a lieutenant colonel or brigadier general. He was pretty high up in the chain of command with the U.S. Army. And time and again, she talks about the betrayal of not only her husband, but the men and the people, the group that her husband was associated with, which was high-level military. And whether they were Freemasons or whether they were what they call themselves existentialists, they had absolutely no soul, and they were easily corrupted. And they were, for money, for power, for sex. And it's this level of corruption, this high level of corruption in this country and in this government, which, if we can isolate that corruption to be a particular group of men, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males, this is why we have a problem. This is absolutely why we have a problem. And one of the things that I think that the Me Too movement can actually be very, very instructive with, and be something that we can learn from, is that as men, we have to step up our game. And this is what I'm having to deal with in my life on a daily basis, which is fine. I don't have a problem with it. It's incumbent upon me as a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male in this body, in this lifetime, which can always be a transcendent experience because we are not these bodies. We come in, we check in, we have a relationship with the genetic code and the lineage and whatever those things are, and we get to live through it. And then, just like anybody who is committed to a powerful and profound spiritual life, we can transcend our conditions. And this is an important thing to understand, because the quality of transcendence and the potential of transcendence leads us through a point of liberation, which ultimately helps us redefine who we are at a spiritual level. And this is the most important lesson we can understand throughout all this. But through the process, we can also look at our enculturation, our roots, our community, and what's taking place on 3D in this planet. And so what I think that the hashtag Me Too can really serve men is that we got to step up our game. We have to really step up our game. And that means that, yeah, we got to treat women better. But at the same time, we also have to look at our corruptibility, especially men in power. It may be too late for men in power, by the way, because they may be so corrupted that they might not, that they would be, um, they would be vulnerable to any kind of outside influence, which is, I think, what we see a lot of times in politics, that there's obviously extortion and blackmail, and people cannot do what they want to do because there's something that that could reveal a part of who they are, which would then make their position a lot more untenable, vulnerable, and then they lose all those goodies for life. And let's face it, being a politician, you get some goodies for life. You get great health care. You get to do insider trading. It is a position of power. So people don't want to sacrifice that power. Now, how does this affect the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male, or any male for that matter, right now? Well, I would say that it would be, in some ways, I wouldn't say it would be irrelevant because we can always work on ourselves and we can always perfect our relationship with our spirit and our nature. But at the same time, it probably would be a better use of time in a lot of ways if we could mold our young men in a way so that they don't have to go through this shit. Now, the problem is that if we're looking at this long time, this long arc, we're dealing with kids that are right now 7, 8, 9 years old because they're in the process of being raised. And the way that they're being raised is, in many cases, quite synthetic. That they have screens that they have to deal with. They also have these programs that are being interjected into the public school system about what it is to be a boy or a girl. There's gender confusion, gender dysphoria. By the way, I want to share a story about gender confusion and gender dysphoria. And I want to. This is like a real victory on so many levels. I would say about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, I had a guest on my show, and he was somebody whose daughter was going through uh, gender dysphoria. Like, she didn't know who she was. She was hanging out with people that were, you know, on the LGBTQ tip. They were angry, reactionary. You know, they're going through a lot of the stuff that you go through in a phase when you're adolescent. You don't know who you are. You don't know where you're going. It's a natural course of action to question things. You know, you're going through that Saturn opposition astrologically. So he was very patient and held his ground in a quiet but firm way that he was not going to support her gender transition from a female to a male. Okay. And this was a really big deal. There was hours and hours and hours of counseling and money spent, you know, thrown at this situation with the daughter. Well, guess what happens? The daughter graduated from high school. She's got a job at Home Depot. She's got a very heterosexual boyfriend. They're doing heterosexual things. Now, I'm not saying that this is the panacea for everybody, okay? But what I'm sharing with you here is the fact that this man had the wherewithal, and a sense of being, so that he could hold the space for somebody who was going through something, and he took a lot of flack for it. You know, he was considered the toxic male in his household. He was considered the problem. He was considered to be a symbol of what's happening in our culture. And I know this guy, and you wouldn't find a sweeter, more gentle giant, a more loving and devoted man to his family. And he suffered the slings and arrows of what took place in that household. Well, the payoff is that he was able to step back and see what was going on with his daughter's nonsense, and that her daughter was being led around, you know, by the nose ring that was probably hanging out in her nose. Sorry, but she was being led around by a group of people who were looking to form some kind of social identity together as a group at a time where people are really trying to define who they are. And once that she was removed from that group, and once she was removed from that environment, guess what happened? Her life changed. She started hanging out with different people, and all of a sudden her biology kicks in and she's got a boyfriend. And I'm sharing this story with you because it's a success story. It's a victory. It is a story about a man, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male who exhibited patience, forbearance, wisdom, and was able to sit there and basically take the shit that he had to in that household. And the payoff is watching his daughter basically go from being a possible statistic, which I talked about on this show, to being somebody who was less of a statistic. Because the suicide rate, and I talked about this before, the suicide rate with young women who are, and young men, by the way, but more women than men for some reason, the suicide rate for young women going from female to male, and even considering it and being on the fence, is about 48%, like a little less than 1 out of 2. Think about that. That's a really, they're at risk for suicide. Once they make the gender transition, it's basically 1 for 2, 50-50. It's a 50-50 shot that they're going to take a chance at, taking themselves out. So what happened is she reduced that risk of taking her own life by heading towards a different vector and a different path. So, I mean, that's a victory in and of itself, that she got closer to claiming her life versus being in this place where you're in this gray area. And the gray area, well, sometimes we deal with shades of gray in our life, as I've got a shade of gray behind me. Sometimes we deal with shades of gray in our life. Sometimes reality is really black and white. See, black and white. It's about choices. People don't like to they don't like to admit that. So hats off to the fellow that I'm referring to. And this is, I think, part of what we need to do. And it's going to be difficult because there's a level of forbearance that I think that we're going to have to practice. But at the same time, if this is really what we're in on in this game, with these bodies, with these earth suits, with these identities, with our cultural moorings and upbringings, then on some level, we have to be able to really claim this thing and claim it in a way that is going to be unimpeachable and impeccable. Now, we're not perfect. We're always going to fail. But I feel like there's got to be a concerted effort now to basically patch these things up in our lives and to be uncorruptible, which means that we have to make better choices. As men, we have to make better choices. That means everything, what we eat, who we decide to sleep with, the reasons why we sleep with them, the jobs that we take. We have to make better choices, because once we make better choices, then we can come from a more informed place, a stronger position, and ultimately we become unassailable. And we've lost that. And the reason why we've lost that is because we have a history of basically people selling us out. That there is a legacy of being sold out. Hello, Misty Morrow. So it would be really great if we could begin to impart this to the young men that are growing up in our world. Now, somebody gave me a really interesting statistic last night, and it was the fact that millennials, the ones that do get married, they're divorcing less. This is a really interesting statistic. So millennials are divorcing less. Isn't that fascinating? We sling a lot of shit at millennials. That they're cupcakes or they're snowflakes or they're living in mom's basement. But the one thing that we can say about millennials that is true and statistical is that they are not abandoning marriages at the same rate that the baby boomers did and even the Gen Xers did. This is fascinating. I think some of it has to do with the fact that they have Pluto and Scorpio. And Pluto and Scorpio it's a very powerful, extremely powerful transgenerational sign. And it does bring conviction and commitment to the table. So that's actually really promising. Now, what takes place inside of those families, and even if they have children, because I do run across millennial couples who do not want to have children and don't have children because they see that it can be a trap. couple of weeks ago, I was at a pub in North Austin watching a football game, and the couple next to me, they were basically organ parts traders. I mean, that's what they did for a living. They traded organ parts. Now, okay, it's not like, they've got like a freezer and stuff in their house, and people drive up in vans and start, taking out kidneys and hearts and livers. No, it's not quite like that. But they belong to this. They work for a network, and what they do is they hook up donors with people who have either recently passed or decided they want to give up an organ, and they put the two together. Right? This is what they do, and it's a fascinating trade. But so we had a good time. We talked and joked around a little bit. They were football fans. Anyway, they were right there in the millennial pocket. I think they're about 32, 30, which puts them, kind of squarely in Millennialville. And they had no desire to have kids. They were going to go on a cruise. I think a week or two after, meeting them at this pub. It's like, yeah, we're going to go on a cruise. And so they're enjoying their lives together as two people by not having kids. And by the way, I don't necessarily think you have to have kids in this lifetime. I think it's a real spiritual act in a lot of ways. And you will find out things about yourself that will be very, very powerful and intense and revelatory. And sometimes they'll be profound. Like the love of a child to a parent is one of the most amazing experiences that a person can understand, because you're involved in this very intimate process of growth in creating the seed for this next generation. But the problem is that we've lost our way, and we have become so corruptible on some level, so corruptible. Steven says, I have a brain to donate, but it is AABBY normal. Steven, at some point, they can fix that. They can reprogram your brain and sell it for a discount. We became so corruptible, and I've talked about this before. And you go back into the 1960s and the 1970s, and I'm not a prude. Don't get me wrong. I just, people can do pretty much what they want as long as they don't mess with a kid. If you want to dress up like a panda bear and have your partner dress up like a cop, I don't give a shit. As long as you're not hurting any minor or any kid, or you're not trying to, take your ideology into a private place and try to, get into people's heads and tweak their shit. I don't care what you do. That's fine. But in the 1960s and the 70s, and primarily the 70s, we have this infusion of like soft porn, supermarket porn. And that's where I believe the corruptibility starts, or it started. And I think in some ways we have to go through this as well. This is part of a much larger process, so that we can get through like a lot of I don't want to call it temptation, but we have to get through a lot of the carbon buildup, on our pipes in a lot of ways, so we can blow the shit out. Because ultimately what we realize, and I think what really successful cultures realize, is that stuff is low-hanging fruit, and it's really a distraction. And the bigger prize, the bigger eyes on the prize, should be about success, having a strong spiritual life, having strong bonds with people, and being able to generate a force in the world so that whatever it is you came here to do is being fostered in a way and supported in a way that supports other people, feeds other people. And so we go from strength to strength to strength. But what happened is we went through probably the last kind of theoretical flowering of human consciousness, which in a lot of ways was quite important as well, the 1960s. But at the same time, there was a detuning. And so we had this really interesting time of, having this expanded and exploded view of who we could be, both as humans and as a culture, and as a society. It's very Neptunian, by the way. At the same time, we were thrust down into this kind of vortex where through whatever the culture was offering up, the temptations were really easy and right there. And it's like, I'm going to grab this, I'm going to grab this, I'm going to grab this. This is part of life experience. I'm going to learn more. I'm going to grow through. That's fine, but that time is over now. We're no longer living in the 1960s. We're no longer living in the 1970s. We're at a time with Pluto and Capricorn, where we have to transform our relationship with responsibility and accountability in our lives, because that's ultimately what Capricorn is, right? We have taken and given our power away to these Capricornian entities, and we're watching it right now in Washington, D.C. And what we're seeing is this Plutonian breakdown of these Capricornian entities, the so-called power elite, the justices. Capricorn is justice, right? And I've talked about this with astrology. Sagittarius makes the laws. Capricorn enforces the laws. You go from the 9th house to the 10th house. You go from Sagittarius to Capricorn. And so what we're seeing here with Pluto and Capricorn is this transformation, number one, this extreme transformation, and the exhumation of this entire process, who these people are, what they mean, and really what's behind the scenes. And what's behind the scenes is really kind of a glimpse, I talked about this yesterday, into the blue blood power elite of Washington, D.C., where they had, back in the 80s, they had drunken frat parties where people fucked, they drank till they passed out, and they went on with their lives for better or worse. And now here we go, what is it, 30 years later, 30 plus years later, they want to be able to recreate that experience and somehow cleanse and purify their entire experience, their collective, their group, but always at the expense of the other, right? So, but we're watching this now, and the whole idea of Pluto and Capricorn is that we've got to take this back. We have to take this back. Yes, this is happening for a reason, because we're seeing the corruptible force. And the corruptible force could be anything from Kavanaugh to Blasi to Feinstein to whomever. The corruptible force is on display right now. And we are imperfect, and we will fail at certain points and times in our lives. But that cannot preclude us from taking responsibility and accountability for who we are. You go back into the 1960s and the 70s, I've been really fascinated with the Rajneesh stuff. And one of the things that really struck me with the Rajneesh stuff and gurus in general is how people would give their power over to them. And that's because in a lot of ways, these gurus actually had some shit going on. Like, if Rajneesh could touch you on your forehead and on your crown chakra, and he could move some energy, he could initiate you into Shakti. I mean, these things are quite real. So there were reasons why people were into this. But I it's not my scene. It's never been my scene. One time I went to go see what's her name, the hugging guru. Forget her name now. But they have this big place in I think it's in Livermore or Pleasanton, and one night I went because I had friends in the Bay Area. Oh man, did they love to go there? They'd love to go there. They'd show up and they'd wait for hours and hours and hours just to get a hug from this guru. So I'm like, okay, I'll check it out. Amma, thank you, Stephen. I went to Amma. So I went there one night. I got on their little bus. Went down to this parking lot down in this shopping center. And I got on the bus and I got up there and I'm walking around and I see Amma, and I see all these people. And there's no place to sit, There's no place to sit, have an espresso, check your email. No, I'm just kidding. No, there's no place to. I felt really like a fish out of water in this place. Like, this is not my thing, it was just not my thing. So I got back in the van. I said, "Get me out of here. It's not my thing." So I drove to go see my girlfriend. That's what I did. Yeah. I had a different experience. I got to hug somebody else. I had a different experience of the divine feminine. Anyway, so there was a lot of giving over the power. This is what happened in the 1960s. And even that whole system of stars, right? They were, the stars were above us. And if you were talented and had moxie and drive and grit and determination, you could reach for the stars. You could be a star. But little did you know that probably to do that, you'd have to bend over somewhere along the way, right? Usually like your first stop, maybe your second, even your third stop. And maybe, just maybe somebody thought you were good enough on some level, they'd want to keep you around, right? This is what we found out about how the system actually works. So there's another giving over of our power, right? We gave our power away to these stars. We gave our power away to these gurus. We gave our power away to athletes. Be like Mike. Be like Mike. Be like Mike. Michael, be like him. Be like him. Align yourself. Well, Michael Jordan's another interesting person, corruptible human being. He stayed away from basketball for at least almost 2 seasons because he had an extreme gambling debt. And the commissioner of basketball, David Stern, knew this. He had to get out. There's also some other stuff around Michael Jordan regarding his father and the murder of his father, which I don't really want to get into right now. But there are people who believe that something really shady took place with his father at that time. Just saying, okay? So we were led along this path, and the path always takes us out of ourselves. Always out of ourselves, right? Even like, I don't want to go there right now. But this is what's happened. And when we take it out of ourselves, what takes place? What takes place is there's a vacuum and a void, and in that vacuum and in that void, the potential for corruptibility actually occurs. And so what we're looking at now is this exposition of, on some level, corruptibility. And I can guarantee you Christine Blasey Ford has been corrupted. Dianne Feinstein, corrupted. Brett Kavanaugh, corrupted. Chuck Grassley, they've all been corrupted. And they're trying with extreme vigor to transform their own personal corruption into virtue. This is what's taking place. And there is a lot of this actually, unfortunately, in hashtag Me Too. That they're trying to somehow transform and exercise a level of, and I'm not talking about everybody. I want to be clear about that because there are people who have been harmed, who have been violated, but there are other people who have participated with their will. And I'm thinking Asia Argento and Rose McGowan. And if you're on a casting couch, you're making a choice. If you're over 18 years of age and you're on a casting couch, you have made a choice, right? You can either walk away and say, you know what, this isn't worth it, or you're going to play the game, you're going to do the thing, you're going to be involved in a power exchange, which has been happening for thousands of years since Solomon built the temple. That's what's been going on. It's nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun. So when this happens, it is an attempt to reclaim one's virtue. That's what it is. And also be involved in some sort of political game, for political gain, and maybe somebody's actually paying you in order to do this, whatever that is. So let's be clear about that. But I think that the moral of this story, if there's any moral of this story, is that we as people, and again, I'm not going to, get into some heavy duty moralistic trip, but I will say that we have to look at our culpability around corruptibility. And I believe that, if we look at our society, we try to get into hierarchies in our society. It'd be very interesting to have a discussion on what those hierarchies look like. Like who's on top, really? Like what group is really on top in our society? I would venture to say, at the risk of having my channel banned, that I believe that Jewish Americans are probably at the top hierarchically in our society. And I would say probably just below that, as a rising group, you'd have Asian Americans. Like this is, again, socially, okay? We're talking about economics, we're talking about political power, and then a small fringe near the very, very top is old school, blue blood, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant money. I would say that group comprises, oh, look at that, I just did a little pyramid thing. That group comprises the top of the upper stratosphere of the social hierarchy. And that's just the way it is. And I'm not talking male or female. I'm just talking about groups. Okay. So speaking from the group that has been mostly involved in sort of the formation of this country from a corporate level to a governmental level, that this group needs to do a better job. And it's not about white guilt. It's more about our responsibility and our ability to not be corrupted and our ability to stand for things that are vital and important, and it's an ongoing process. And if we're not there, we have to be involved in the act of transformation. Now, every single individual for every group, I believe, has this responsibility, because ultimately, and this is what Emily and I have talked about, that government is something that is bound to fail. It is imperfect. And not only is it imperfect, but it is used not to actually care about you, the people. It is used as a mechanism so that extremely powerful groups have a legitimate, no, legitimate to some extent, because the process itself is legitimized, right? By voting, by having positions, people filling those positions, but also having a slightly delegitimate way of coalescing power, moving money, being a part of factions, and ultimately representing these various gangs that government has become all around the planet. Okay. And that has nothing to do with us. Nothing to do with us. And many of us are non-gang affiliated, if you know what I mean. So we got to figure this thing out. And it starts with each and every one of us. Each and every one of us. And for me, we've got to do a better job at, and especially if you're at a high level, like I doubt if you're listening to my videos, but if you're at a high level and you're in a position of leadership, you have responsibility. You have real responsibility. And sometimes that responsibility would entail walking away from situations where your best interests are not being served. And I mean best interests at a higher level, not the best interests that put money in your bank account so you can go on a vacation with your wife and take her on a cruise so that she doesn't go wander off, go be with somebody else who can go do that. Oh, that's another part of the game, isn't it? Yeah, it sure is. But we have to do a better job, because what we're seeing here is we're seeing the culpability of corruptibility. And we have to take where it starts. It starts with each and every one of us. And it's a sad day. It's a really sad day when we have to witness what's going on in Washington, D.C. It is not a victory for anybody, I can assure you. It is not. And some people may think it is, but it is not. All right, why don't I get to the chart? And let's look at the chart here. You're not going to be able to see it. That's going to change pretty soon here. So I actually cast a chart for the Senate vote for tomorrow, Friday, and I got it at 10 a.m. And one of the things that really jumped out at me was that over the course of the last 2 weeks, we've been in a Venus-Mars square, which is very intense because, you know, Mars is the masculine principle and Venus is the feminine principle. So they've been in conflict with one another. Clearly, we're seeing this in the 202. And Venus in Scorpio is about the exhumation of what's gone on in relationship. And Venus is about to go retrograde, by the way. It's very, very interesting. So we're getting close to its stationing, but still, we get into Scorpio. We're going. It's not like Scorpio gets into the past, but it will get into the past if it has to deal with sort of the shadows and the darkness and the shame and you know the again some level of corruptibility. I mean, Scorpio is about power, right? Scorpio's into power. That's what Scorpio is into. Venus in Scorpio is into relationships that wield power. And it is not in the best position for Venus. But tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning in Washington, D.C., Venus is front and center. It's right on the ascendant. Just below it, Jupiter is in Scorpio, also in the first house of the chart. Wow. Jupiter is opposing the moon in a wide opposition in Taurus. What we want tomorrow is we want emotional stability, but at 10 o'clock in the morning, the moon is the highest planet in the chart. So we have the feminine being placed in significant areas of the chart, front and center, Venus and Scorpio, right? Venus and Scorpio right on the ascendant, and the moon at 10 o'clock in the morning in the seventh house, highest planet. So the feminine at that point in time is in a position of power. Just this is the way it is. This is how the chart works. Now, but here's what's interesting is there is still that Venus-Mars square that's going on. Mars being in the third house. So in the third house in Washington, D.C. at 10 o'clock in the morning, what is the third house? It's about this, right? Talkie. Gemini, duality, polarity. Now, Mars is being buttressed by the sun, okay? So we've got Mercury in Libra, Sun in Libra, theoretically, that's equality, that's balance, 11th house out there for all the world to see. So if we look at this from the masculine principle, Mars is actually having a interesting relationship, right, with the sun. And by the way, even though Libra is ruled by Venus, which is feminine, it is an air sign, which is masculine. Strange with Libra, isn't it? Venus, meanwhile, is opposing the moon. It is opposing the moon. Now, here's what I think is going to be interesting. I think that there could be a woman who comes into the fray with the moon in Taurus that is in opposition with this Venus and Scorpio bit. And it could be somebody who went to school. I don't know what's going to happen here, but there's something about the opposition with the moon and Venus. And even though they're both very, very prominent, they also can mean two very, very different things. The moon in Scorpio moon in Taurus is stubborn and fixed, placid, passive. Venus in Scorpio is also fixed, but not so passive and not so placid. So it's going to be very, very interesting tomorrow, just to watch it from an astrological perspective. Venus is also in opposition with Uranus, which means that, guess what? Anything can happen. Uranus is squaring Mars. Uranus is opposing Venus. Uranus is the wild card, and it's in the 6th house, and it is retrograding. We may see something tomorrow that we've never seen before in the history of this country when trying to approve a Supreme Court justice. Now, by the way, I think Trump and his crew blew it. I don't think Trump makes these calls. I think Trump is getting the call. If I were Trump, I would have nominated a woman Supreme Court justice, right? Or a woman candidate, a female candidate, and a conservative one at that. That's what I would have done. I would have looked at this saying, look, what are these people thinking, right? I mean, are they that dumb? Are they that stupid to think that they're not going to be taken at every step of the way? They're not going to have some kind of conflict every step of the way? Because now, anytime a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male who's been culpable to being corruptible is going to have the kitchen sink thrown at him. That's just the way it is. That's just the way it is, right? So John Roberts came in. Nothing happened with John Roberts. Why? Why did nothing happen to John Roberts? Well, probably because it's a very strong rumor that John Roberts is bisexual, might even be gay. He sure had a very cozy relationship with Obama. And not only that, but they flubbed that swearing in ceremony. Do you remember that bullshit? They couldn't even like say the ceremony. Are you kidding me? Roberts was probably practicing that his entire life, and he can't even get it right. So they go downstairs into the White House so nobody can see, so Obama can put his hand on a Masonic Bible. This is what happened. But nobody questioned John Roberts because, well, he wasn't the right kind of guy to question, if you know what I mean. Brett Kavanaugh, on the other hand, clearly. But Trump and his people should have seen this. Are they that stupid? Or did they choose Brett Kavanaugh on purpose? Question mark. Because they should have known that this was going to happen. Did they think that they could just like have a final stand here? Is this it? Is this the line in the sand? Is this the Iwo Jima between the left and the right? Is this what they were planning for? And that if they could push Kavanaugh through, they were going to somehow squash the resistance? Well, we'll see. We'll see. Again, based on this chart that I'm looking at, the feminine is at a much more dominant position than the masculine. Even the sun in the 11th house is beginning to set. Okay, it hasn't risen yet. The sun doesn't rise until a couple hours later, about 12 noon. If that's the case, and we adjust the chart at 12 noon, then we might actually have a decision that's based on balance and fairness. That's quite possible. Look who's here. Look who's here. Talk about uncorruptible. This is the guy. This is the man. Oh, and his girlfriend has decided to join the proceedings. You guys are into this today, aren't you? Here's Jasper. Can you say hello to everybody? Can you say hello to everybody, Jasper? There you go. Yeah. What else is going on here? Well, Saturn's in the 2nd house in this chart. Saturn in Capricorn. Hardcore basement. Saturn does have a trine going on with Uranus and has been for a while now. It's actually a very nice trine. That's the old and the new being able to have some kind of integration together, correct? Yes. But it's also squaring the sun. And that's going to be going on throughout the day anyway, so that really doesn't matter. Squaring Mercury. Tomorrow is a very, very difficult time to make a decision on this Supreme Court justice. Neptune, of all planets, is not afflicted. Venus trine Neptune, Jupiter trine Neptune, Moon sextile Neptune. Again, this is the feminine, right? I think the masculine tomorrow may have a difficult day. Let's put it that way. And if that's the case, I think clearly with the Mars Venus square and some of these extremely combustible elements that are going on in the chart, it may have a spillover effect. It will be on a Friday, so of course the news cycle will be somewhat tepid over the weekend. But this is going to be a very, very interesting event to witness. Extremely interesting event to witness. Leo's on the midheaven at that time at 17 degrees. That is masculine energy. Interesting. I wonder what the odds are in Vegas. My buddy Robert Bonomo did a tarot reading about it, and he saw that Kavanaugh goes down in flames, and that the whole process is it's just a complete clusterfuck and not great for the country at the end. So that's his prediction. I'd say right now, there's probably deals being done. Because what's also really interesting is that the Rosenstein piece is taking place at the same time. You know, there's like weird stuff happening simultaneously. Like they're looking at releasing like all the documents for this quote unquote Russian meddling. Like, where's that? Where is the Russian meddling? What are we talking about here? We're not even talking about Russian meddling now. Now all of a sudden it's this new frontal assault with Brett Kavanaugh and anybody who wants to assume a position of power, who has the wrong bona fides, which would have been the right bona fides 35 to 40 years ago. All right, let me get in the chat room and see what's going on. I'm going to look at before I do that, let me get into the live piece here. Let's just see what's going on live. See if I can tap into this. See where we are with this. Oh, Blasi's testifying. Let's.
Mitchell, I don't know whether this is fair for me to interrupt, but I want to keep people within 5 minutes. Is that a major problem for you in the middle of a question? Because I've got to treat everybody the same.
I understand that.
Grass is an old serpent.
Senator Feinstein or you.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. I didn't see the line was right. Please do.
So we're going to come back to that.
Okay. I see. Okay.
Here's Blasi.
Okay.
She's a mess.
For the benefit of Dr. Ford, I think she'll continue that after the 5 minutes here.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to begin by putting some letters in the record.
Without objection. So
Here's another
you
serpent.
want to tell me?
A couple of serpents. Grassley and Feinstein. Old serpents. Old dragons.
And 1,000 female physicians across the country. Those are what the letters are.
So this is interesting. They're not even letting Blasi talk.
I want to thank you very much for your testimony. I know how very, very hard it is. Why have you held it to yourself all these
Here
years?
she goes.
As you look back, can you indicate what the reasons are?
Well, I haven't held it in all these years. I did disclose it in the confines of therapy, where I felt like it was an appropriate place to cope with the sequelae of the event.
Well, can you tell us what impact the events had on you?
Well, I think that the sequelae of sexual assault varies by person. So for me personally, anxiety, phobia, and PTSD-like symptoms are the types of things that I've been coping with. So more specifically, claustrophobia panic and that type of thing.
She's a freaking professor in psychology. This is an indictment on psychology if she's suffering these things after all these years. Why should she be teaching psychology if she can't even hold her shit together? This is ridiculous.
This has affected your life.
The primary impact was in the initial 4 years after the event. I struggled academically. I struggled very much in Chapel Hill in college. When I was 17 and went off to college, I had a very hard time, more so than others.
No, please.
Forming new friendships. And,
please. You know, this is, I'm sorry. This is a bunch of bullshit. I had a very hard time forming friendships, harder time than others. God, we've all had shit go down in our lives. What does the Astro for the midterms look like? I think we did a show on that. I'll do a show on that on Sunday night. We'll look at the midterms again on Sunday night. Cops have the best pot too. They do, because they arrest everybody and snatch their pot. What else? Man, they must have evil astrologers. They must, right? What else do we have in the chat room? Not much. I think we're good. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get off the broadcast here, because here, let's just do one more listen in. Let's do one more listen in. Here we go.
With boys, and I had academic problems.
What were when we spoke, and it became very clear how deeply you felt about this and the need that you wanted to remain confidential. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, so I was watching carefully throughout the summer. Well, my original intent, I just want to remind, was to communicate with everyone when there was still a list of candidates who all seemed to be, just from my perspective, from what I could read, equally qualified. And I was in a hurry to try to get the information forward, but didn't quite know.
Okay, so just to keep this in context, her mentor is a freaking MK Ultra master. Okay, he's an MK Ultra master, Dr. Frederick Melgus. And the story behind Melgus is he took a homeless person in, Lois Lang, and not long after he took Lois Lang in, she went to Washington and offed a guy in the CIA who was onto Melgus and Christine Blasi's father, Ralph Blasi, who was a banker for the CIA that was essentially moving money for Iran-Contra and all the cocaine for weapons stuff, including some of the SNL money as well. And Melgus was part of this. He's probably profiting off of it. So he's an MK Ultra mind control master, and he is her mentor. And this is somebody who theoretically teaches other people at Stanford as she gets into the workings of the mind, psychology, psychotherapy, and she's a basket case. If anything, this is an indictment on psychology in general. You should read the comments. Amazing. Amazing. All right, I'm going to get on out of here. I'll be back tomorrow. Let me just plug this in.
I'll be back tomorrow with Steve and Chris Crimmy as we time travel once again to understand the myth, the magic, the memory of John D. David Kelly and the forces that shaped America thereafter. Please join us on the Friday Forecast. for another adventure into time travel, esoterica, occult history, and America. Have a great day. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to shape what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix, signing off from Flyover. Ciao, ciao.